This is Rabbi Dov Fischer of Young Israel of Orange County. If you're watching this on Wikipedia, we're glad to have you. If you like it, please give us a like. If you don't like it, we don't care. Feel free to forward the link to this particular YouTube to other people you like. And frankly, it's a good way to get even with people you don't like. So send it to them too. And consider subscribing to our website, to our YouTube. In that speech by the Kohen, he tells us about certain exemptions. Whoever's had just built a house, which we now learned last week or 2 weeks ago, can also include a woodshed or place for the animals. We talked about different kind of things you might have constructed. Or let's say someone who planted a vine, or let's say 5 fruit trees, as long as they're from the fruit of that the Torah regards as the fruit of Israel. Pardon me if I cough. So it could be 5 fruit trees of the same fruit, or one each of 5 different fruits. If someone's just planted, if someone just built a house or one of those constructions that I mentioned, they're exempt for a year. If someone's just gotten engaged to a woman and has not yet married, let's say, and we talked about this could also apply to someone who just got engaged to a widow, and we talked about all of that, but it would not apply to someone remarrying the wife that he had previously from whom he was divorced. And these are exemptions we learned about: the building of the house, the planting of the fruit of the crop, and the and being married. And the Gemara continued, and we said there are speeches that are delivered first by the Kohen and then by the generals, the officers in the army. And we learned last class in the Talmud that basically the Kohen, the so-called priest, the Kohen makes the initial announcement. And it's kind of, he doesn't speak loud. It's beneath his dignity, we learned, to be yelling and shouting so that people can hear him. Not nice, not good. And they didn't have microphones in those days. So he spoke just a sentence or two softly. And then the generals dispersed among the army units and continued with the message of chapter 20. Okay. So first of all, it's just a kind of an insight. Very often the Talmud is very legalistic, and the rabbis of the Talmud are debating law. And how exactly is this law applied? And what does the law even mean? And to whom does it apply? And they get very legalistic. Sometimes they get homilistic. They get into homilies. And they take the text, and sometimes rather than going into the law, the depth of the law, they want to learn from the discussion maybe aspects of good ideas on how to live life. And then they get to the law. It's really like you with 2 or 3 or 4 friends getting together every Sunday, not between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. and Pacific time, but getting together every Sunday for coffee or whatever, and talking about the latest. We're not going to get into the politics of it, but you decide, let's talk about the Biden pardon. And you get into a discussion about the Biden pardon. I'm not going to get into it, but you're over coffee and you got an hour, and maybe you don't really have an hour of stuff to say about the Biden pardon. While you get started, someone talks about, well, actually, I have a relative who was wrongly imprisoned, and I wish she could get a pardon from the, well, and someone else will say, well, that's a state crime, so probably want to get a pardon from the governor. And you have that conversation. And what he held up a bank? What kind of bank? Oh, it was a savings and loan. Oh, they still have those? I thought they closed down the savings and loans. No. And then you get discussion. How did he do it? Well, he went in when the guard was off duty. Oh, those guards. I mean, I have an uncle who's a guard, or I have an uncle who's an aunt who's married to a guard. And this guy, he doesn't work all day, just sits in front of the bank and uses a plastic toy gun. And, the conversation goes everywhere. unless you're like in the Supreme Court or a federal appeals court where you're locked in on the discussion of law, the Talmud goes into everywhere, just everywhere. And so amid the discussion of this law, the exemptions, which we just did 2 weeks ago, right, the week before Thanksgiving, they make another point. Here we go. Tana Rabbanan. The rabbis taught Asher Bana, referring to the exemptions, he who built a house. Asher Nata, he who planted a vineyard, a tree, 5 trees. Asher Eras, he who got engaged for first time to someone else other than his former wife that he's going to be with for the first time. So the Torah talks about 3 particular exemptions. And we know there are going to be others too, like the one who's very fearful, though that doesn't apply in a Milchemet Mitzvah when they're commanded to be fighting. Okay, so it says exemptions for the one who built, the one who planted, the one who engaged. The rabbis now are offering Tana Rabbanan. The rabbis offer an insight in how to live a life. Limda Torah, the Torah, indirectly, not overtly, but subtly was teaching you derech Arutz, the way of life. Yeah, you thought when you're learning chapter 20, you're learning about war, but on the other hand, you're also giving you an idea like you might want to share with your college kids or young adults. Sheyivne Adam Bayit, that it's their opinion that, did you notice how first it lists the exemption for the guy who built a house, a shed, then for the guy who planted a vineyard, a tree, then 5 trees, and then who got engaged in that order? Built, planted, engaged. Torah is teaching you an ideal way of life. First, you should build a house. Before you get married, in other words, you should set yourself up financially. Interesting. Sheyivna Adam Bayit. First, a guy should build a house. Now, most people don't build a house, buy a house. And I guess it could work likewise in today's society, an apartment, condo. Before you get married, you should be able to afford, and this is all on a guy. This is not like either gender, because only men fight in the Torah times in Jewish wars. So we're talking about Jewish men fighting, and the spouses of women. A guy first should buy a house, buy an apartment, get himself set up in his home. Doesn't mean he needs to have all the floor treatments and window treatments and furniture, but he should first have a place to live before he gets married, or even thinks of he should first have a place to live. V'yita kerem, and then he should plant a vineyard. Not literally a vineyard, but he should sort of get himself set up a little bit, thinking about what's he going to do for like business. How's he going to earn a living? Because why do you plant a vineyard? You don't plant a vineyard just to show up in better homes and gardens. You plant a vineyard to get grapes, whether it's to sell the grapes or to make wine because you want to have homemade wine. But you plant the vineyard or you plant 5 trees, again, not just to make an interesting backyard, but to start providing for your nourishment, your nutrition, to feed yourself. First, a person should get himself located in a home. Then they should get themselves set up to start feeding themselves. And only afterwards should he get married. It's kind of interesting because there's a lot of emphasis as well in the halakhic world that people should get married young, in their 20s, in their early 20s. And that's sort of a fundamental Orthodox value forever. It's always been that way. There are a lot of reasons. In the old days, you're not supposed to, there's certain things a man is not supposed to do unless he's got a woman with who can do it. And he's only allowed to do it if he's married to her. And he's not supposed to do it if he doesn't have a wife. So the Gemara somewhere says, like, a person who, like, I think it's age 17 or I'm off by a year, who it puts a curse on any guy who's not married by his late teens. Now, it's Torah times. Nowadays, people don't get married much then. And to my frustration, and I'm a pretty hip, cool guy. I know I'm wearing a suit and tie. That's for you. I'm in touch with reality. And I taught 20 years at law school and a cross section of society. It's shocking. I'm not being a prude here. It's shocking that people wait so long to get married. It's just shocking, first we're going to live together for 5, 10 years to make sure we're right for each other. And if you Google it online, where else are you going to Google? You'll find the data show that people who live together before they marry have a much higher divorce rate than people who marry before they live together. And there are all kinds of reasons. We don't have time for it, of course. You could even think about it yourself. If you're sleeping with someone for a long period, you're focused on sleeping with the person. It's a kind of an informal relationship that centers around sleeping with the person. And then there's other things that you do. You eat food, you go to a movie, you go skiing. Once you really get married, and then it's like all kinds of stuff. Who's going to throw out the garbage? And who's going to rear the kids? And who's going to bring them to the doctor? And who's going to pay the bills? And that's, if a marriage is built on, we had a lot of fun sleeping together, it's going to end up in a divorce, unless you're really lucky. On the other hand, people who marry first before they sleep together, so it means they've decided we have enough together that obviously that's a factor that's motivating them too, but it means they've already figured out without sleeping together that they can maintain a 10-minute conversation and stuff like that. And so it's very surprising now that, and yeah, it's true. It's true. A lot of people always say, well, if you get married young, you're not experienced, you don't know everything, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to get, yeah, right. So the response is, nowadays, everybody gets married in their 30s, whatnot, 40s, and the divorce rate is at least as high, if not higher, than in the 1950s when people got married before they slept together and they stayed married. So the rabbis are teaching, interestingly here, that it might be a good idea to delay a little bit getting married, first be able to pay for your apartment. Now, in those days, they didn't have college. So you didn't have a mandatory 4 to 7 year delay in growing up. And I'm not knocking, well, today I would knock colleges, but in general, I'm a graduate of college and grad school, and it enriched I can't imagine not having done that. And I would want that for my kids. I did want it for my kids. So now the society, you need to delay 4 years for college, and you delay 3 years for grad school. Of course, you can marry while you're in college, which I actually did. But people grow up 10 years later. I mean, between us girls, and I apologize to any college-age student watching this on YouTube, but that whole generation is 10 years behind. They grow up 10 years later. I mean, can you imagine needing milk and cookies and a room set up by the college administration to help you pull yourself together if your candidate doesn't get elected president, or if somebody says something hurtful to you? I mean, they don't grow up now. They can't get married till they're 30 because they're not grown up yet. But halakha would look at, it's important, and in the halakhic world, we tell our kids that we don't just throw them in and get married, but we tell them, my bubby always did that to my Uncle Yaakov, no, and she didn't have to say anything more. That one word and question mark, that was that took three. That was a surrogate for 3 sentences. When are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? When are you going to get married? So it's a little bit surprising here, the Gemara is saying, that you should be established. But on the other hand, back then, where you're not going to get a law degree and a medical degree and whatever, or a really significant training in some kind of vocational area, the idea is if you get married in those days and there's no money I mean, you're going to become instantly a cost to the community, and everyone's going to have to start feeding you. And so it's an interesting Gemara. They're picking that up. It's not even the halakha we're learning, but it's part of the Gemara discussion that it's telling us. First get married, and then plant, and then go into a house. Okay. The Af Shlomo Amar in this, and they're even quoting King Solomon in his book. I guess this is Proverbs. That's Sefer Mishlei. Put your external affairs in order, like get a house and get ready what you have in the field, plant a vineyard, yada yada. Then build yourself a home. House and home are different. So the Gemara is learning that, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I did want to bring to your attention, it's right smack in the middle of our discussion of the speech by the Kohen. We're going to skip a bunch, and we're going to do this. And then we're going to get into the killing of civilians, the issue of killing civilians during wartime, whether Judaism considers that genocide, under what circumstances, war crimes, etc. Matni is short for matnitin, or masnisin, which is the Aramaic word for Mishnah. You'll recall the Mishnah brings you basically like the code book, the law, and then the Gemara, which follows, discusses, analyzes, etc., and goes into tangents like the one I just taught you. So it says that the officer should speak to the nation. Rabbi Akiva Amar, you've heard of Rabbi Akiva, Hayare Varachalev Kamashmo, and Rabbi Akiva says, for example, how do we understand chapter 20 when it says someone fearful, timid, scared out of his wits is exempt from war? It means literally. It's referring to a person incapable of standing up to the sound and the noise of the battlefield. That the official shall go on addressing the troops and say, is there anyone afraid and disheartened? Who fears, and has a weak heart, not in terms of physiologically, cardiac, but he's scared, he's chicken. Better go home. He should not end up creating a demoralizing and get other people scared. Morale is so very important. We were just talking about it in our other class about 10 days ago, the Tuesday Navi class, not the one from the other day, but the week before, how the chief rabbinate in Israel was debating whether soldiers should give divorces to their wives before they go to battle, nowadays with the IDF. We were learning about how in the time of David, soldiers all divorced their wives before they went to battle, so that if they got lost, missing in action, and could not be found, at a certain point, the wives would be allowed to remarry and not fear they're committing adultery inadvertently. And the question arose, how should that be today? People, God forbid, going into Gaza, going into parts of Lebanon and stuff. What if they don't come back? And what if the wives? So should we restore the tradition? And the chief rabbinate ruled, not the chief rabbinate, but the IDF chief rabbinate. They have their own rabbinate, like American chaplains. So Israel, the chaplains are all rabbis, and then they have a chief rabbinate among them. And that chief rabbinate ruled, chief rabbi of the IDF ruled not to give those bills of divorce because it'll demoralize troops. Troops are going in very, very patriotically and determined to wipe out these evil Hamas and Hezbollah and those who help them. And they understand it's a matter of life and death, and it's a great moment to fight for the land of Israel. And no one goes in there expecting a bad personal result. And to start asking soldiers to do that kind of brings home a different message. And it brings home the message of, if the rabbinate thinks there's such a high chance that this is going to happen to me, that I need to, so that's a bad thing. And also, you don't want to, if you like your wife, you don't want to divorce her. It just doesn't, you don't want to you don't want to do that. Like, for example, like in my marriage with, let's say, Ellen Zichrona Livracha, occasionally we'd have an argument. We're married 20 years. But like from the beginning, we had, and it's the greatest marriage, thank God for it, and it was wonderful. So I don't want to be taken out of context or give the wrong impression of her. But right away, we one of the early things, not the first thing, but we agreed the word divorce never comes up in this house. That not even as a joke that, you're so crazy, you're lucky I don't divorce you. Like almost like a joke. Like you with your crazy mishigas. Anyone else would divorce you, but I love you. We made an agreement. The word just doesn't come up in the house. Because if you don't use that word, I didn't know how good the marriage is going to turn into. But that doesn't become the first word that blurts out when something happens that's not working out. So divorce is a messy, I mean, we all know what's going on. A person who's got a good marriage doesn't want to do it. Even though he's told no one's going to take your wife, you'll come back home, you'll remarry 1, 2, 3. People don't want to do that. So back to the Gemara. Okay. So the Mishnah says, first, in terms of Rabbi Akiva, we don't want the demoralized coming. Zehu hamit yorei mino averot shebiyado. Sometimes it's not that he's chicken. And I don't even like saying chicken because that's very judgmental and it's not really fair to call anyone a chicken. And not because of political correctness, but everybody's coming from certain, it's not fair. I'm just using that as a shorthand. But here the point is, Rabbi Akiva is saying, there are people, it's not that they're afraid to go into battle. It's that they are so God-fearing, so religious, believe so deeply that everything that happens is by God's direction, that they are afraid that they have sins that have not been expiated, that were not atoned for on Yom Kippur. Maybe they davened on Yom Kippur and feel that they came out of Yom Kippur white as snow, but now it's 4 months later. And maybe they feel they've done some sin or sins, and they are afraid to go to war because they believe so deeply in God and reward and punishment. They're afraid that they're not going to make it, not because they can't fight well, but because they don't have a good ledger with heaven. So there's that also. Lefichach toltolo haTorah et kol elu sheachzor biglolan. And therefore, that's what the Torah's, that's why that's an exemption. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Almanala Kohen Gadol, well, so certain men go home if they're just getting married, but not if a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, is engaged to marry a widow, because that's a forbidden union. Kurusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot, or if a regular Kohen is engaged to marry a divorcee, it's not allowed. Or a chalutza, that's a woman whose husband died, his sister-in-law, the husband died, left no children, so the brother in biblical times would marry her. That's a chalutza. So a regular guy in biblical times would be allowed, even expected to marry her. And we've talked about that in detail enough. But a Kohen is not allowed to marry if his brother Kohen, if his brother who is a Kohen passed away without kids, that Kohen is not allowed to marry that surviving widow. And so if he's engaged nevertheless to marry her or to marry a divorcee, that is not an acceptable marriage. Therefore, he is not exempt from the war. Actually, the Kohen did not go to war, typically, but it's the principle that they're bringing out here. Mamzeret unetina Israel. Likewise, a female bastard to marry a Jewish man is not allowed. A bastard may marry another bastard. That is, the child of adultery and a child of adultery, or a child of incest with a child of incest or adultery. They may marry, but a regular Israel, a regular Jew, may not marry mamzer, bastard, the child of adultery or incest. Bat Yisrael mamzer l'tayin, or a Jewish lady to a bastard. Harehu hayarei v'rach halevav. These are people who are not exempt from war, and yet, on the other hand, these are people who are particularly afraid that their sin would endanger them in war. And so, let's just, we're winding down on this Gemara. Mishneh continues, and it shall be when the officers conclude speaking that the captains beneath them shall be appointed at the head of the people. In other words, as well at the rear. You need guards and you need officers all over. And although we would like to think of the Jewish fighting soldiers in the Sinai desert on the march with Moshe Rabbeinu to Israel as fierce and proud and unyielding, there were officers in the back with iron rods to kind of beat him and whip him with regard to anyone who attempts to turn back and flee from the war. He was allowed to beat his legs, not to whip him in the back to the way that, let's say, South Dixie masters in the American South did to black slaves in the 1800s, 1700s. Or the way that British kings would have done to people, but they would beat them in the legs a little bit, not too much, because if you cripple him, he's not going to be able to fight either. But they didn't let people out, and that's sort of like every army. Once you're in, you're in. You might, if you're not drafted, you don't have to go in, but once you're in, they kind of don't let you out. Because the beginning of fleeing is a downfall on the battlefield. Techilat nisa nefila. When people start running away, it slowly but surely turns into a tidal wave of people running away. First, a few people run, and then other people scared in the back start thinking, well, I would like to get out of here, but I don't dare do it. But I see other people are doing it, so I think I'm going to join the crowd. And so, like when it talks about, we learned in 1 Samuel, some of the different wars with the Philistines, Israel has fled before the Philistines. And there's been a great slaughter. It was a war between Yisrael of Plishtim, and then what ended up happening is it was a great massacre, because it says, Vayanusu anshe Yisrael b'nei Plishtim, that the men of Israel fled from the Philistines, Vayiplu chalalim, and a great many died in battle. And so they would try to prevent people from fleeing. They would hold them in place. Again, it's very interesting thing. You can't desert. Guess that's the word I'm looking for. You can't desert the troops, like that guy in Afghanistan a few years ago who just deserted. Did he want to come back home and made a mistake by getting into the army? I don't know. Go into someone's head, but he deserted. You know the story. So his officer sent like 5 men or so to go find him. Where did that guy run off to? And the people who tried to find him, some of them got killed till they finally got their hands on him. And you may remember that story, Obama pardoned him. So there's always a concern of people trying to desert. And the halakha does not allow deserting. We're talking about ethics and values at war. And, we might not have thought about that. Well, I'm sure if a guy doesn't have to go to fight, if he's built a house or gotten engaged, I'm sure if he's afraid, I'm sure he can go and decide, look, I thought I'd be able to handle this. I've been at the battle for 3 weeks. I can't do this anymore. I got to go home. So we might have thought, yeah, okay, we got it. No, once he's in, he's in. Now, the Mishneh now goes to a very interesting point. I've made this point in classes. But Medavarim Amurim, all these laws we've been learning are Milchemet R'shut, are in optional wars, voluntary wars. Israel doesn't have to go to the war, but the king of Israel decides we're going to war. We're going to suppress this country or we're going to expand our borders, and it doesn't fall under the category of Milchemet Mitzvah, a commanded war, but we're doing it. In such a war, all these exemptions take place. Apply. Aval b'milchamot mitzvah, hakol yotzin. But if it's a commanded war, so what's a commanded war? We learned this way, way, way back. For example, if Israel's attacked, the Torah commands Israel, the Jewish people, to go to war if attacked. Likewise, if it's one of those wars against the 7 Canaanite nations that were occupying the land of Israel when Joshua brought everybody in. Those were commanded wars against the Yevusi, Girgashi, Chiti, Emori, etc., etc. So in the case of a commanded war, Hakol Yotzin, everyone goes to war, all the men. Afilu, and by the way, when we say all the men, ages 20 to 60. The Torah in other place tells us that the people above 60 do not go to war, and those under 20 do not go to war. Afilu chatan mechedro v'chala mechupata. Even if the couple just got married, the guy is already in the bedroom, or the kala, the bride, is standing under the chuppah, and in other words, the guy is there alongside her, he gets pulled into battle. He cannot say, well, I'm supposed to get married, and the Torah says, I mean, here's proof I'm getting married. Here's the chuppah, here's the rabbi, and here's the band. No, we'll talk about it more next time. I want to go to this next thing, particularly because there's been an ICC arrest warrant, and everybody's talking genocide. And I wanted to get really directly into an interesting discussion of Rambam, Ramban, and the Gur Aryeh on the idea of killing, quote unquote, innocent civilians during wartime. Again, within our greater topic of ethics and values. For this, I have to go to chapter 34, Perek Lamed in Sefer Breshit, the book of Genesis. The famous, infamous, notorious story of the rape of Dinah. As you know and remember, Yaakov Avinu had 12 sons. With Leah, he had Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Then Rachel could not give birth, so she gave her maidservant Bilhah, who gave birth to Dinah, to Dan and Naphtali. That was 6. And then Leah gave over Zilpah, who gave birth to Gad and Asher. That was 8. And then Leah had 2 more herself, Yisachar and Zvulun was 10. And finally, Rachel had Yosef and Binyamin. So we know that Yaakov had 12 sons. Less attention is given, though it explicitly appears in the text. Leah also gave birth to a girl, Dinah. And there's so much commentary in general about Dinah. Beyond her having been born the one girl in a family with 12 brothers, there's just so much discussion about her and how it relates to Yosef and Shimon. But for our purposes now, let's see the infamous, tragic thing that happened to her. Basically, she got raped. Vateitzei Dinah bat Leah asher yolda Yaakov l'ra'ot b'vnot ha'aretz. Yaakov and the boys and the whole family were living, had finally found some peace. Parshat Vayeshev. They finally found some peace. They're living in the land of Canaan. And they've been through all kinds of stuff. Yaakov, what a hard life. He had to flee from his brother Esav trying to kill him, or wanting to kill him for having received the birthright. And then he had to spend 20 years with Lavan, his uncle and father-in-law, who pretty much oppressed him beyond all description, made him work 20 years, didn't give him a decent room to sleep in. He often had to sleep outside in the freezing cold and was not really given a decent wage, and just hard life, one after another. And it just never ended. It was really just horrible. And then finally, he settles in Canaan. And after all those years, he finally has some peace. And he gets to be with his children. It's very nice. And Dinah one day goes out for a walk. The family, look, you have 12 sons. There are many Midrashim that suggest that they all were married by then. So that makes 24. Father is 25. 4 wives, Rachel was still alive, is 29. Dinah is, there's at least 30 people there. It's just like a neighborhood. It's like, how many people live on your block? 30 people is like a thing. And so they did not really hazard out of the basic family encampment much, and certainly not the girl, because in that world, it was much worse than this world. There's a lot of rape in this world, but there's a certain degree to which the society will not tolerate it, more and more so. And even so, there's women get raped and women go running at 5 a.m. to stay in condition, and some guy follows them, and all these stories we tragically hear about from time to time. But in those days, forget about it. The best I could compare it to is the things I read in the news from India. It's like they have such a rape problem in India, and group rape. There's not even the shame of a rapist trying to arrange to do it in a private area. They have things like they're in a public city bus, and 10, 20 men all on one woman. I mean, well, that's what the old world was. I mean, Canaanites. Keep in mind, the Canaanites were morally disgusting people. Torah tells us about them even afterwards. I believe in Vayikra 18 at the end. If I'm wrong, I will get out of it real quick, because I don't want to waste a lot of time. But if I'm right about it, towards the end of 18, it's 19 already, where basically, where basically God says there are certain things certain kind of physical actions, there you go, you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to do sexual stuff like what they did in Egypt, the place that you have just been living in before your exodus. And likewise, you must not do according to the ways of the people of Canaan, the Canaanites, the ones to whom they're in the desert, to whom I'm bringing you. Don't follow in their ways. They did things that whole long list you read on Yom Kippur afternoon, and when we read Parshat Acharimot. So she's walking, and the locals see her, particularly a guy named Shechem. Now the city is named Shechem. Shechem was the son of technically the mayor, but technically the governor. In those days, a city, since there were no cars and trains and planes and mass communication, in those days, a city was like what we today would regard as a state. And so a mayor of a city effectively was like a governor of a state. So Hamor, which translates into donkey, but that's his name, and they didn't necessarily speak our Hebrew. Maybe the Hamor meant donkey, maybe it was a word that doesn't mean the same thing. He had a son, Shechem. They were Hivites. So that's one of the nations of the Canaanites that ultimately we would be, under Joshua, we were commanded to eliminate. Nesiha Arutz, Vaikachota Veshkavota Ve'aneha. And Shechem seized Dinah and raped her. Again, the Torah, everything, the wording is always gentle. So even for the word rape, they use the word he oppressed her. They don't go as explicit as a Hebrew word for rape. And it's understood. He slept with her and he disgraced her. It's understood what that means. And then after raping her, he decided, I actually like her. I want to marry her. And of course, it's not like today where a person gets married to one and only one wife. So he could have a harem, son of the king or the governor, whatever he was. He could have a harem. He might already have 20, 30 women, and he wants to add her one day a month. So we don't know what that means, but he liked her. It says he liked her and he wanted to marry her. Vadaber alev hanara, and he, after raping her, he talked to her kindly and tried to persuade her to stay with him. Vayomer Shechem el Chamor aviv lemor, and Shechem said to his father, Chamor, the governor, I really like her. I'd like to have her. Dad, can you make the arrangements necessary for me to have her as a wife? V'Yakov Shemaki Timeet Dina Bito. Word got back to Yaakov Avinu, Jacob. His daughter Dina has been raped. He's heard all about it. Uvanav Hayuat Meknehu Basadeh, and the 12 brothers had no idea. Again, there's no news, there's no newspapers, telephones. There's just no way to mass communicate. The boys are out with their sheep in the fields, and so they don't know. V'charish Yaakov ad Boam, and Yaakov said nothing, although knowing what had just happened, until they came home. Vayetze Chamor avi Shechem el Yaakov l'daber ito, and Chamor, the father, the governor, the father of Shechem, the rapist, went to Yaakov and said what he came to ask him. Could we have your daughter for, my son's wife? We'll treat her very well, obviously. We're going to treat her very well. She'll never want for anything. She'll be a queen or a princess or whatever it is. Uvenei Yaakov ba'umen hasadeh shamam, and the 12 sons of Yaakov raced back home as some messenger got the word to them. You better come home. Something just happened to Dina. So they raced home. Doesn't say Ratsu raced, says Ba'u, they came home. But it says Kisham when they heard it. They were aggravated and they were infuriated. Ki nevala asa b'Yisrael, because a despicable, unspeakable outrage had been done to the people of Israel. There weren't a lot of us, but we're God's chosen people. And we live by different rules. We treat each other by different rules. We treat other people by different rules. And we expect to be treated that way ourselves. And for someone to be raping Dina, daughter of Yaakov, granddaughter of Yitzchak, great-granddaughter of Avraham, is unspeakable. It's a navala. Lishkavet bat Yaakov. The idea that someone had beyond the brazenness to sleep with the daughter of Yaakov, and that is something that is not done. It's very unusual Hebrew usage in the Bible or anywhere, that this is something, this is what happened, and it is something that is not done. And so they continue discussing it, and Chamor says, please, my son really loves her, and come and let's marry. Let's all marry. Let's our guys marry some of your daughters, granddaughters. Your guys can marry some of our women, and let's bring your family into the greater Shechem population. And we'll trade together, do commerce. We'll only be bigger and stronger and richer. So you'll dwell among us. Land will be open before you. Settle, move about, acquire holdings in it. It'll be great. And you want me to pay you a dowry, some kind of a price? Whatever you want, I'll pay whatever you tell me. Ask me a mohar. Ask me a bride price. Whatever you want, I'll pay whatever you tell me. He has unlimited money. He's the governor or the king or the mayor, whatever. And he's going to do this for his son. And the sons of Yaakov, so here's the deal. The sons of Yaakov, this is not exactly happening. He's starting with the wrong people. But we can't just tell him that, because there's a lot of them and there's only 12 of us. So they decide we're going to have to do this surreptitiously. But this is not happening. This is so not happening. We don't have to look at each other. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to weigh the possibilities. This is not happening. Kain lo ye aseh. How did it say it? Kain lo ye'aseh. This is not happening. This is not done. It isn't happening. So the sons of Yaakov respond to Shechem and Shechem's son Hamor, and they act in stealth. And they say, look, here's the deal. Lo nuchal asor davar zeh l'terir acheinu l'ish asher lo orla. You don't know us. We are a separate sect. And our sect has a rite, a ritual, R-I-T-E, has a ritual. We only can, let's say, marry and be intimate, however, women intimate with circumcised men. There's just no, it's just our thing, our right, again, R-I-T-E. And it's like I don't know, you meet Amish or you meet whatever, and different quaint people have their quaint thing, Shakers. So we are quaint, a small group, and we require men to be circumcised before they can fool around with our women. Ki cherpa hi lanu. Because in our sect, the idea of a woman being with a man's foreskin it's just not possible. It's not possible. So therefore, here's the deal. Bezot neot lachem. Here's the deal. Just become like us. Go ahead, lehimol lachem kol sachar, mol like the word milah, brit milah. Go ahead and agree to circumcise all your men, and then we'll have fun. V'natanu et benotenu lachem. Then we'll give our daughters to you. V'benotechem nitach lanu, and your daughters will take. V'yoshavnu etchem v'yinu li'am echad, and we'll live with you, and it'll be just hunky dory. Am echad, one people. But on the other hand, but if you don't agree to have everybody circumcised, we're taking our daughter and we're going. It's interesting. If all they really wanted is to get back Dinah, and they think that they're capable to get back Dinah, regardless of whether these people circumcise, right? If you don't circumcise, we're taking back Dinah. If you do circumcise, we'll stay with Dinah. But what they're kind of conveying is that their analysis is they can pull Dinah out either way. So in that case, why do they do what they're doing? Because they have determined that the people of this city are going to be wiped out. We're wiping them out. I want to make that clear again, because it's not clear from the story. And you can read it 50 years in a row on Shabbat morning when they get to that parsha, and it doesn't quite get highlighted. They're saying if you don't circumcise, we'll still pull our daughter out of your house, your palace. So if it were just about getting Dinah, they didn't have to be circumcised. There was a deeper plan. Now, Hamor, the governor, said, okay, fine. And he told it to all the people, B'nei Shechem. And then he told to all the people. He says, basically, let's go ahead. First, his son got circumcised right away. I guess people did it to themselves. It can be done. We know Avraham Avinu, our patriarch Abraham, circumcised himself. Obviously, nowadays, it's pretty much inconceivable without a mohel. And then he went to the public. El Shari Ram, Vedabrul Anshe Ram. They spoke to the city. And they said, look, these people, we'll call them Jews, though they didn't use that name in those days. These people are our friends. Let them settle in the land, move about. Land is big enough for the two of us. And we'll take their daughters, and we'll give our daughters to them. The only thing is they want us to be circumcised. What was that? That's great. They just want to be circumcised. So anyway, we're going to get circumcised. And before you start saying, look at the wealth we're going to get, that they're going to be pumping into our economy. The cattle and substance, the beasts, just have to do this. So everybody said, yeah, okay. And they all got circumcised. And then we're told that the day when the pain and the suffering post-circumcision is worse is the third day. So on that day, at the height of pain, Shimon and Levi brothers of Dinah, came with their swords, and they massacred everybody in the city, the governor, his son, and every male in the city. They put Hamor and his son Shem to the sword, took Dinah out of the palace, and they left. The other sons of Yaakov came upon the slain and plundered the town, etc., etc., etc. And it concludes, Yaakov is very upset with what happened. Obviously, he wants his daughter back. You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to kill everybody in the city to get my daughter, your sister. You've brought trouble on me. You've brought great shame and trouble on me, making me odious. That's a good translation for word. Basically, not only will they hate me, but they will look upon me and the neighboring tribes the way we look upon them. They're going to try to kill us. Among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and all of them, if they unite against us and decide we Canaanites need to kill out those people because they're even bloodier than we are, then we're all going to be destroyed. That's the end of the Jewish people, God forbid. V'nishmadati shmad, ani uveti. And the brothers, Shimon and Levi, respond, but they answered, should our sister be treated like a prostitute, like a whore? We're going to learn a little more today and continue next week, but let's go a little more. But I want to make a point on that as well. Famously, it's a very mysterious and hard to understand what the takeaway is. What's the takeaway? Yaakov Avinu, our patriarch Jacob, is 1,000% against what just happened. So that's an easy takeaway. The Jew is not allowed to do that, and they did a bad thing. There's only one problem. If you look at that chapter, the chapter gives them the last word. Shall our sister be a whore? That's that translated prostitute. It's just not the way it goes anywhere else in Tanakh. The last word, the Tanakh never gives the last word to the guy who loses the argument. He makes the argument, and then the winning side makes their argument, and then they get theirs. And a lot of rabbis, an enormous amount of commentators say that Shimon and Levi had the right answer. That you put your faith in God. God is not going to allow the Jewish people. God did not have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not going to let Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov suddenly disappear. He's not going to let the family be wiped out. That's not what this all has been. God has already made a covenant with Abraham and to Yitzchak and to Yaakov, to you and your children forever and ever and ever. That implies they're not about to get wiped out next week. So there's a very strong understanding. There's two schools of thought. There's a very strong school of understanding that there was not, that his fear that he's going to get wiped out is incorrect, and they had the right idea. That it was not enough merely, in this case, to save their sister, but to take it on the entire city. We're going to learn a little more because of time. We're going to get back into it more next week. And also, after we do this whole unit, we're going to go back to the Gemara that I left a few earlier in class today. But the thing I want to bring out here, we're going to take a quick look at the Gemara, is that we're talking about killing civilians. We're talking about killing innocent civilians. The guilty are Shechem, the rapist, Hamor, his father and enabler. The rest of the people, they didn't know it was going to happen. They are not the ones saying, okay, it's good. They're even saying, we just want to have peace with these Jews. They're awfully rich. And if that's what it takes to get these Jews so we can marry their women, they'll marry our women, we'll do commerce. Sure, we'll do it. And you end up with an interesting thing because they deliberately wipe out everybody. And the ones doing it, just if you didn't, many of us know it already, but just to highlight it, is Shimon and Levi. And the idea is that Leah had 6 sons, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, that's Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and later Yisachar, Zevulun. But Yisachar Zevulun were really young compared to the others, so they're really not in play on that. And Reuven is the firstborn, and maybe it was beneath his dignity to do it. And the next two in line were Shimon and Levi. And Dinah was born to Leah, so they were not just half sister, half brother, but they were. That's our sister. But let's do that last piece of Gemara I want to do. At least get started on it, and then again, Mirz Hashem, more next time. Let's get this thing off. It's called a floating meeting control. And every time I jump back in, it goes on the screen and blocks. So that's why I do that sometimes. Rambam. You know Rambam. Mishneh Torah Hilchot Malachim. Laws of Kings, chapter 9. Halakha Yudalit, law 14. The seven mitzvot b'nei Noach, the seven Noahide laws. There are 7 laws that even non-Jews are obliged to live by. Not allowed to steal, not allowed to blaspheme, not allowed to murder, to kill, not allowed to eat the limb of a living animal, not allowed to engage in incest. And one of the 7 is that they are required to establish courts of law that enforce justice. One of the 7 Noahide laws is there are 6 laws, like I just said, not to do this, this, this. And the 7th law, they must establish, they must establish courts to enforce the law. What law? The other 6. So, v'chetzat mitzuvin hein al adin. So Rambam is going to teach, the way Rambam and the Gemara often teaches is by starting with a rhetorical question. And how do they fulfill the commandment to enforce the other 6 laws? Because I'm skipping it, but he's talking all about the laws that apply to non-Jews. And now we get to this one. Lahasira ta'am. So, Chayavin lahoshiv dayanin. They're obligated to seat, establish courts and seat, S-E-A-T. I spell words sometimes if I'm afraid it's not clear. They have to seat judges, dayan, judges, v'shoftim, and officers of the law, police, b'chol pelech u'pelech, in every county, ladun b'sheish mitzvot elu, to judge and enforce the 6 other mitzvot that apply Noahide laws. Ulhazhir et am, and to bear the responsibility of warning the public not to do these things. And that's going to be mostly the officers. And then the judges will execute judgment. Uven Noach she'avar al achat misheva mitzvot elu yehareg b'sayif. And a Noahide who transgresses any of these 7 laws is liable for the death penalty by sword. For example, and for that very reason, according to halakha, the citizens of the city of Shechem that we just learned about this moment, all were liable for capital punishment. Why? Shaharei Shechem gazal, because they stole Dinah. They stole money and they stole Dinah. V'heim ra'u, and the innocent civilians saw, v'yada'u, and they knew, v'lo danuhu, and they did not put him to justice. And because they did not put him to justice, they were chayav mita. So we're going to go much more into it now that we're on this context and everything, but you see where it's going. In Gaza, because first I want to learn all the classic halakha and the rest of Rambam, and then there's Ramban, a little bit different take, then there's Gur Aryeh, a slightly different take in the Gemara, and then there's also a biblical account in the time of King Saul. We're going to go to that, all of which deal with the question of killing civilians, all of which show that the halakha permits killing innocent civilians if that's what has to happen as part of the war. And this one was very unusual because the defense, we always explain to others on behalf of Israel, is that they're not trying to kill civilians. They're trying to kill Hamas, but Hamas is locating themselves and their weapons amid the civilians in residential apartment buildings, underneath hospitals, underneath mosques, underneath schools. And there's no other way to get them. Same thing with Hezbollah in Lebanon. This is even different. Here, they thoroughly could have accomplished their goal without killing the civilians of Shechem. And they deliberately killed the civilians of Shechem because they deliberately regarded that the civilians were not innocent, but had a hand in the kidnapping, and under the 7 laws of Bnei Noach, because they had not set up courts to warn and enforce, they were liable for death. And so here in Gaza, all the more so, we are trying to avoid killing them. And it's worth a whole nother discussion that can go on for a year, whether we even should be, whether Israel should be sending food and water and electricity and humanitarian supplies. That's a whole nother discussion. But here you're doing all of that, and you're not trying to hurt any of the innocent people, if there are innocent people. So we're going to keep applying from core halakha, not from rabbi sermons, even good ones or bad ones, but we're going to the text, to Chumash, to Rashi, to Talmud, to Rambam, to Ramban, to Aryeh. We're seeing what's the halakha. And that guides us. It may not be good for the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court, but first and foremost is we have to know for ourselves, are we following the proper law? Because if we are, then we're good. You still have to deal with other people, and that's politics. And there are lots of times halakha says you can do this, but without violating halakha, you don't take full advantage of everything in the halakha because you're being politic and you recognize that there's a big picture. But it is critical. That's why we're teaching this and learning it. At the very least, first of all, before letting all the world tell us their values, we know that our values are right. Our values are just because they're given from God. They're based on the Torah. And then once we have that in our pocket and we're solid with it, then it gets interesting to see how does that compare with what the others have to say. And we, of course, know. I'm with this, I'm closing now. To call Israel guilty of genocide, anyone with an open mind knows that's not true. You don't really need, I get upset sometimes getting all these emails from Stand With Us and Honest Reporting and the Israeli government Public Information Center and that lady, that actress, Noah Tishby, and all these really good people who send me these emails with like 75 paragraphs explaining why it's not genocide. It's not genocide. It's not genocide. What is genocide? It's wiping out of people. It's not wiping out of people. If they were wiping out of people, they'd be gone by now. It's just simple. It's like it doesn't deserve a discussion practically. They wouldn't, if you're going to kill out of people, you don't feed them, send them water, even if you're doing a bad job with water. You don't send tons and tons of food and water to people. You're fattening them maybe for pate, what's it called? Like for liver pate or something like that, foie gras. So you fatten up the goose in order to get more fat. You don't do that with people, except the Silence of the Lambs. They're not with the fattening up people for the purpose of killing them. The whole thing is crazy. They could have destroyed so many more. So we understand that the rest of the world, their justice and their laws are criminal and cause and lead to the deaths of thousands of truly innocent people who die observing these unjust laws. If we had these laws during World War II, many of us would not be alive today because our parents would have been killed in Japan trying to finish the war against Tokyo. And because they didn't have the Geneva Accords in those days, Truman dropped the bomb, and all of our parents who were serving in the Pacific Theater were able to come back home and give birth to us. So there's so much more. We'll come back more with this next week. Thank you very much for being here.